Welcome to Penn Township. Penn Township is a second-class township. We have about 3,000 residents. We have a very small staff, and we have experienced some interest from developers since we have exit 37 here. In warehousing, we have 2.5 million square feet of warehouse space now, another 2.5 million proposed in the near future. We don't have the knowledge or experience necessary to deal with the issues that arise with this type of development. So that's why we appreciate this type of an event. It gives us a chance to make some contacts, gain some information, and do a better job of protecting our residents. So to all the panelists, to the attendees that are here, to Rick and Dr. Pomeroy, thank you very much for coming and helping us out today.
As I think we all know, Cumberland County is the fastest growing county of the 67 in the Commonwealth. We are blessed with a robust rate of growth and development, population growth, the highest population growth of any county in the Commonwealth. But that brings challenges too. What the Cumberland Conservation Collaborative is a 501c3, that's a nonprofit. And what we do is bring people together. We educate, we synergize, and we advocate. There's a couple dozen different groups that are participants in the collaborative. We've had some good synergy. We've worked on projects together. But what this is tonight is our very first stab at an educational forum. I'll use the term, this forum is going to be at the 50,000 foot level, because we have folks here from the eastern, from the central, and from the western part of Cumberland County. And obviously, concerns and issues regarding growth and development might be a little bit different. Issues with agriculture, you might not have that in East Shippensburg Township. And I saw County Commissioner Jim Hertzler just came in. We expect County Commissioner Vince DiFilippo to join us in a little while. How can we recognize and take advantage that we are the fastest growing county? And we're not opposed to growth and development. I will share with you, I'm a real estate developer. I'm a contractor. I work in new housing construction, doing energy conservation components of it. But nevertheless, we want to recognize and take advantage of those opportunities, and we want to make sure, and we hope to make sure, that several generations from now, we still have a high quality of life here in Cumberland County. That our grandkids can canoe down the Yellow Breeches, or take a trek out the Cumberland Valley Rail Trail, or just admire some open scenic vistas. So that's what the Cumberland Conservation Collaborative is about. We have 18 participating groups that brought, and organizations, and some governmental agencies that brought displays here. I hope you had an opportunity to take a look at them. They'll be around if you have any questions afterwards. But right now, I'm going to turn it over. We do have a panel of 4 distinguished individuals and a moderator, Dr. George Pomeroy from my alma mater, Shippensburg University. So I'm going to turn it over to George for a little bit, and then I'll talk about the logistics of tonight's event too.
All right, thank you, Rick. I understand that these are normally used for bingo night, so I have this urge to say B24. I don't know if that's going to help us or anything. Welcome to this forum entitled Preserving Cumberland County's Rural Landscape and Natural Resources. What I see this is a conversation where we discuss how to balance securing 21st century jobs, protecting a landscape of buggies and Pennsylvania barns, and trying to enhance our neighborhoods. What it isn't is it's not a debate. It's a conversation about how we can work together to achieve objectives and goals, and speak to issues across those facets of social values, economic values, and environmental values. And so that we have a community 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road that we want. This is also a forum where we respect the expertise, opinions, and acknowledge the interest of all stakeholders. I want to again thank the Cumberland Conservation Collaborative for organizing this event, the 18 different stakeholder groups that are presenting the booths that are here. I want to thank, again, Penn Township and the volunteers for Penn Township. And of course, I want to introduce our panelists. To my immediate left is Andrew Willingford. He's Vice President of Human Resources at Volvo Corporation, or Road Machinery in Shippensburg. To his left is Troy Truax, planner and chair of the South Middleton, I live in Southampton Township, South Middleton Township Planning Commission, and he's planner with Michael Baker International. One more step down the road there, Jonathan Pinkerton is Vice President with Susquehanna Heritage. And at the very end, Mr. Bill Chain, who is Agricultural Program Manager with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Rick, if you wanted to say anything else now?
A group of the Cumberland Conservation Collaborative has been planning this event for 3 months. We did invite in, by the way, thank you, you gentlemen. Let's give a round of applause for the panel. We've had a group working to put this forum together, and more recently, the last couple meetings, these gentlemen were involved with that. Our group came up with 4 initial questions that we're going to pose to the panel that get at the subject of tonight's forum. But also, Ed Franco, and Ed is, I'm going to have him come up front here. Ed has some note cards and some pens. If any of you have questions that you would like posed to the panel, just raise your hand. Ed will get you a note card. You can write your question down. We're going to pass those questions on to Dr. Pomeroy, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. If we don't get to your question, the panelists have all graciously agreed to stick around for a little bit after the formal part of the forum is over, that you can pose your question directly to whichever of the panel you wish to reach out to. So thank you. So we're going to, I guess, start with some preliminary or initial statements.
Yes. What we'll start with is some stakeholder perspectives, or our panel perspectives. And if you folks don't mind, we can start right here and move on the way down. Our only challenge is we've had a little bit of a technical snag that some folks had a couple slides and some people had a couple more slides. But what we're going to try to do is let folks introduce their perspective and the special expertise they bring to landscape issues in Cumberland County. So with that said, that's right, Bill. So Mr. Bill Chain will start.
Yeah, happy to start. Thank you. Thank you to the collaboration and Rick for creating this opportunity. I'm really pleased to be here this evening. I want to say that I've found connection to many of the individual booths that are surround the room. Most present, I think, in the Cumberland, in the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy, where I've donated and spent time over the last 15 years. But my daughter, also in the back from Preservation PA, it's a great joy to see her here. And I know that the folks work very hard to try and get the pink out of the slides up there. And I have, I think, spare parts here to kind of justify that. So I'm sure that those things will go back together before the end of the night. The first slide that's up there is mine, and I realize it's very difficult to see, but it's a pretty simple picture of young people playing on a seesaw. And so much of the literature that's come out prior to this evening and the words that are used to talk about our community, at least in tonight's perspective, have to do with balance. And balance is not something that is uncommon to us. Most of us find a way to think and talk about balance, perhaps most notably in our own lives, in how we spend time, trying to find the balance to spend time with family, busy careers, community life, spiritual life, all those kinds of things, and reserve time for ourselves and personal enjoyment. So in that experience where we think about balance, we recognize that to make a change, that there has to be a bit of management that goes on. Just like the youngster standing in the middle of the seesaw, who is, maybe you can recall back in the day, I know I can, where I might have put more weight on my left hip or my right to control the seesaw. And there's some creativity going on there too, with a dog and some other activities going on to make that. So it's a pretty simple picture, but I think it might help us begin to frame what we'd like to see in our community. None of us are here by accident. I moved here about 36 years ago and enjoy the Cumberland Valley and County immensely, and couldn't think of another place where I'd like to be. So it's important to know that if we want to seek a balance and the balance isn't quite going the way we're liking, that applying some decision making and management is what we might have to do. So I can stop with that, and I'm going to move this along a bit, I hope. Yeah. Those were other slides of mine, but very difficult to see, so I'm just going to move right on.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Troy Truax, and again, I'd like to echo Bill's comments about to Rick Ravino and the group for inviting me to share some of my perspectives. I'm a certified planner. I've been that since 2001, and what that means is basically like an attorney or other engineer have some certification in land use planning or other subject areas, and I'd like to share some of my perspectives. I'm a Shippensburg University graduate. I graduated in '94. And also '96 with my master's, and have been a resident of Cumberland County since 2001 or '91 when I started my educational career there. I'm originally from Fulton County, so I grew up in basically more farm animals than we had residents in the county. So I understand what rural means and how precious rural environments are, and Cumberland County is very much like Fulton County, but only better because we have a lot of good economic development opportunities. So I'd like to share my perspectives. I've also been the chair and sitting on the Planning Commission for South Middleton Township for about 15 years. So we've experienced a lot of industrial growth, commercial growth along the 81 corridor, but we have nice places like Boiling Springs. We have the Appalachian Trail. So we understand, at least hopefully I have an understanding of how trying to balance what Bill said, your growth and development of how you can sustain your local tax base to pay for the services that are necessary that the municipality has to pay for, but also making sure that you're preserving those spaces that actually make people want to live and raise families and enjoy the outdoor environments. I'll give credit here to Kirk Stoner, your county planning director, for maybe helping me guide through some of this information. But in Pennsylvania, as you may or may not know, there is enabling legislation to plan. And I guess from my speaking points tonight, definitely coming from a planning perspective, and I view that you must have like a blueprint to understand what are your assets and understanding how do you preserve those assets, but also at the same time addressing your challenges and also taking advantage and effectuating positive change out of those challenges. And I would state that in Pennsylvania, our planning is really focused at the county level because there's a requirement for counties to have a comprehensive plan. Cumberland County does, and it's currently updating that plan, but there's no requirement for municipalities like Penn Township and other municipalities, boroughs, cities, and whatnot. There's no requirement for them to have a plan. But in many cases, Cumberland County, if you give it a letter score, it's doing very well because almost every municipality has some type of comprehensive plan, has some type of land use regulations, be it subdivision, land development, or zoning. And that's positive, because those are what actually help drive and implement the vision and the goals that you've set out in your planning documents. So these a couple slides just show you the level of planning that's going on in Cumberland County, and Penn Township is part of that process. From County Comprehensive Plan to its multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan, and you thought, well, how does that affect me? Well, stormwater, flooding, risk areas, and that's all part of stormwater management and other types of natural resource protection components in that. Rivers conservation plans, I know Denny's here from the Yellow Breeches watershed. So there's many types of assets and there's a plan behind that. How do you preserve those assets? So this one's really hard to read, but this one just simply demonstrates that almost every municipality has some level of planning already in place. Now the question becomes, how effective are those plans? Are those plans old and outdated and don't mean anything or not pertinent to today's situation? That's for you as residents of those communities to decide that with your planning commission, with your elected officials, to have that conversation. Multi-municipal approaches is really critical and important. You can't always look at yourself in a vacuum. And there's been several instances, including the Western Regional Western Regional Collaboration. There is a regional comprehensive plan in this area, as well as in the Lemoyne, Camp Hill, Wormleysburg area has a regional plan. So they've looked at themselves as what assets do they bring to the table collectively, and how can they actually look together to plan for their future. This one just is a quick snapshot, and again, the pink hues make it difficult, but I think this graphic shows it better. Is, most of Cumberland County, if you drive through it, we're driving on Interstate 81, and a lot of times you're seeing a lot of open spaces in farm fields, but if you get closer to the western part or the eastern part of the county towards Harrisburg, it's more developed. And really what this pie chart and what the previous map showed is the majority of your land area, I'd say 43% is what that graph shows, is comprised of agricultural land. So there's significant amounts of open space still readily available in Cumberland County. The question is, where's the appropriate use of future development that might take farmland or open space out of that current state and put it into some type of developed use? And really what's driving that is your transportation, our transportation infrastructure. Highways, rail, and wherever those nexus of those intersections occur is where you're going to have the most development. So if you took a picture snapshot of the previous map and juxtaposed it with this, where that heavy network is where that growth and development is occurring. And I won't bore you with some of these slides, but some of the residential growth trends are pointing to the same thing, where you're having housing permits, housing construction largely occurring Carlisle and to the east. The same thing with commercial and industrial is also, again, where those transportation corridors intersect. And if we use Penn Township, you really have an intersection, exit 37, right? That's really starting to now, over time, because the other areas are now being built out, like Carlisle, exit 44, places to the east are built out with larger warehouse logistics. So where's the next logical space to actually grow? It's along the 81 corridor, and between Shippensburg and Carlisle, the gaps are starting to be filled in. So I would say, from a planning perspective, now is the true opportunity for Penn Township and other communities in this area, and all communities, is to really have a plan for your future and be proactive in that planning. This one just simply shows where some of the hazardous materials, like the reporting facilities where they have hazardous materials on site, it really is indicative of where industrial facilities are. This mirrors, again, where those industrial facilities are located. And again, it shows that Carlisle and to the east is where that heavy concentration lies. But you're starting to see some of that sprinkle down through the part of the valley where 81 is down towards Shippensburg. This one's trying to show where the county has looked at preferred growth areas. And this is a preferred growth area in these boxes. Mount Holly Springs, sort of like village growth is Newville, and then Shippensburg is designated for as a preferred growth area. Everywhere outside of that is where it's preferred not to concentrate development. So that's one way the county has looked and provide some type of guidance to where they see growth should be concentrated, because infrastructure exists in those areas to support that growth. And finally, I'll just end with, the county has done a great job with farmland preservation. And this map really shows where outside of those growth areas is where they're concentrating those efforts of preserving farmland. So if you start to think about those are real assets that you need to start, if those are important to your communities, then those are the types of opportunities you need to capture, and then try to have that balance, as Bill said, where does economic development fit into our rural landscape? For example, here in Penn Township and other communities here west of Carlisle. So I'll leave it at that. I've got a couple other slides I might come back to as part of the question and answer period.
I think we're going here. Oh, I'm sorry, John.
Thanks. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. My thanks also to the collaborative. I have to say, when I first talked to Rick and to Katie, the excitement was contagious. What you all have going here was a really special thing, and it's really awesome to be able to look out at an audience, see so many people take time out of their schedules to be here. Thanks for the work that you do in your communities. It's again, very encouraging to see the interest and the passion for moving forward into the future. Again, my name is Jonathan Pinkerton. I'm with Susquehanna Heritage. As we're talking here this evening, I'm trying to think, okay, well, what is I live in York, but like, what is my connection to Cumberland County, right? Okay, well, my parents lived in Camp Hill when I was born, so hopefully that can count. And my dad took me fishing in the Yellow Breeches. But you know what, as a kid, you know, and I'm thinking about that a little more, well, which, Yellow Breeches, York County, Cumberland County, which side, right? But as a kid, I didn't think about that at all. I didn't think about boundaries as much as I do now. And I think a lot of people don't recognize boundaries. For example, tourists and visitors, you know, do they see when they cross a county line or much less a municipal line? Oh, I just passed into such and such township. So boundaries are, in some cases, are critically important, you know, for decision making. In other cases, you know, very difficult to deal with, particularly in the context of externalities. So in economic terms, when you talk about externalities, you're talking about such things as noise, air pollution, gridlock traffic, and so forth. And those are examples of when boundaries become very difficult to ascertain and to try to govern within. So with that being said, again, I work for Susquehanna Heritage, and I'll apologize. Susquehanna Heritage is part of the State Heritage Areas program. It's currently under the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and they've had the program in place since the late 1980s. It was formed under then Governor Casey, and has transcended all the administration since then. It's been a fairly well-funded program, and does have, I think, some respect around the country in terms of being a program that continues to get good public investment and gives good reason for public-private partnerships. We were designated in 2001, and you can see up on the map there where the other heritage areas are. But essentially the concept behind them, and I think Mike Esham in the room is in the room here somewhere with DCNR. He can tell you more about, there he is. Thanks, Mike. But the Heritage Area Program, you know, in a nutshell, I think was intended to deal with, you know, shifting economies, right? So things have changed since the days of coal and oil and steel. Not that we don't have those industries anymore, but it's changed. And one of the ways what we can do is embrace that change to look at developing a tourism economy. So that's part of what we do at Susquehanna Heritage. This gives you a better sense of both counties that we serve, York and Lancaster counties, and our area of focus is the Susquehanna River there. So it's essentially Harrisburg to the Mason-Dixon line, which is about a 53-mile section of the river. And then, just to give you a sense of our vision, you know, we're pretty lofty in our recent, creating our recent vision. What we said is we want the Susquehanna River to be a national destination for outdoor fun and cultural discovery. Not a statewide thing, but a national thing. So we're actually trying to catch up with some of our counterparts in the state who have National Heritage Area designation. So we have a bill pending in the Congress right now to bring national designation to our region, which would mean National Park Service support for our work. Part of what we do to implement that vision is look at placemaking. So in terms of what that means is looking at places that are special and how to make them even better. And from a planning perspective, looking at the infrastructure needs and services that are needed plays right into the tourism development component. In other words, if we're attracting people to our region, do we have the facilities in place to accommodate them appropriately? I guess I would just end with this. Again, it's a little bit difficult to make out, but this particular image here is taken from Chickies Rock County Park on the Lancaster side of the river, looking over to York County. And it's just bucolic, right? It's just, I mean, if you can see it in the actual colors, I mean, this is a beautiful shot. But what I wanted to say about it is, Immediately in the vicinity of this area is an incredible amount of industrial development. Just upriver is 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, right, with steam coming off the cooling tower. Below that is a solid waste management authority's incinerator. Below that is what used to be Wyeth Labs, now GlaxoSmithKline. Above that is Armstrong ceiling tile. In many ways, this river has been industrialized over the years, and part of what we're doing at the heritage area is to sort of take some of that back and say, what places can we make available to the public for recreation and to enjoy the resource? So I'm really glad to be here. I view myself as one of your neighbors, and again, honored to be part of the panel, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so my name is Andy Williford. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources for Volvo Construction Equipment down in Shippensburg. I'm from this neighborhood. I live about 3 streets down on the left, and my family's here back in the corner there. I'm just so impressed with the panel today and the comments from Jonathan and Bill and Troy and George. Thank you for emceeing today. I'm the person from industry that was invited to participate in the panel, and I want to talk a little bit about my company and what Volvo tries to do from a corporate social responsibilities perspective, and what we've tried to do as citizens in this community, as neighbors within the community. So the slide I have on the screen right now shows an important development for Volvo Construction Equipment. This is a fully electrified quarry site that's all right now in our concept lab phase. We've got one of these pieces of equipment in operation down in Shippensburg right now at our test site. What it is an electric aggregate hauler, and when you remove a diesel engine from an aggregate hauler body and you take away the articulation, you take away the cabin, you have a much smaller footprint with a much higher load carrying capacity. So this is where we see opportunity and the future within construction equipment relative to electrified work sites, and that kind of technology that's a far departure from what we have been doing in the past with diesel engine technology and commercial transportation solutions. So the mission of our company is we want to drive prosperity through transportation solutions, and when we talk about that, when we talk to our employees about it, when we talk to others about it, we want to make sure that the concept includes society, that we want to drive prosperity for society and for our company so that we can be relevant in the future among our competitors to help define what that future will be, like this electrified job site. The vision for our company is to be the most desired and successful transportation solution provider in the world. And desired and successful is important when we consider the prospect of moving our North American headquarters to Shippensburg. And we actually manage the Americas, both North and South America from Shippensburg headquarter offices. We wanted to look at certain factors, and one of those factors was, could we source a workforce that would help us achieve these goals of prosperity and being the most desired and successful transportation solution provider in the world. And we think we found it in this community. And we're going to do that by having leading customer satisfaction. We want to be the most admired employer. We want to have industry-leading profitability. And then we want to work with purpose and values, things like trust and passion and performance, change, and customer success. When we talk about that admired employer idea, again, we look at it from a micro perspective. Every team needs to be the best team. Every team needs to be the team where you want to go to work. And if we can do that as a group, then we feel like, you know, one day we might be able to put a billboard on I-81 that says we are the most admired employer. Our position on corporate social responsibility and sustainability is really, in the big triangle here, really built on 3 factors, and that's responsible behavior and shared value and then sustainable transport. When we talk about this foundation of responsible behavior, it starts with conduct. We want to have trustworthy managers, we want to have trustworthy reporting, we want to have trustworthy financials, and we want to be a dependable company. And we want to do that in our community. We also want to talk about things like clean manufacturing. So our facility in Shippensburg, just this first quarter 2017, 17, is now a zero landfill facility, and we've been working hard on that, and it's taken a lot of behavioral change, but we feel that we've stepped towards that in a good way, and we look always at new opportunities, whether it's measuring idle energy at the facility, or you know, how long the lights stay on after the shift is over. When we talk about shared value, we talk about moving society and our business forward. That's important to us on a local level when we talk about things like community engagement, workforce development, and then these global commitments. And I can mention that one of our global commitments is we're a sustaining partner with World Wildlife Foundation. So we do take this idea of corporate social responsibility seriously. And then around sustainable transportation, as I mentioned earlier, there's electrification, there's safety, quality, environmental care, there's workforce safety and worker safety, and then there's these smart solutions that we talk about. VC in Shippensburg, just to give a little bit of history, we acquired the business in 2008, so the facility has been there for about 40 years. It was part of Ingersoll Rand's road machinery business, and we bought the business in 2007. And that included the facility in Shippensburg, one in India, one in Germany, and one in China. What the facility in Shippensburg has allowed us to do is to consolidate six locations in North America. We've closed 2 facilities in Canada, we've closed a facility in Mexico City, and we've closed 2 facilities in North Carolina, and then one in Quebec. So we brought that all to sort of consolidation in Shippensburg. We've got about 800 people in Shippensburg right now, and we've got professional functions in engineering and purchasing, finance, sales, and then production activities around welding, painting, machining, assembly, and material handling. So that's a brief introduction of our business and our approach with sustainability and corporate responsibility, or corporate social responsibility.
Thank you.
Is this on? Ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 of our 3 county commissioners here. I'm going to invite them up. I understand that they would like to make kind of a little joint statement. So Vince, I see Vince coming from the back, and Jim. Jim Hertzler has been one of our county commissioners, first elected in 2011, and Vince more recently. Jim is the vice chair, and Vince is the chair of the Board of Commissioners, so I'll turn it over to them.
Mr. Chairman goes first. No, it doesn't matter. We often kid each other age before beauty, but who the hell cares? When Rick told me about what he was going to do here tonight, and that was a while ago, it sounded pretty exciting. I've got to be honest with you, I did not expect to see as many people here tonight, so this is excellent. You know, we all have at least one thing in common, all of us in this room. Doesn't matter, I mean, I see younger people, older people, people of different backgrounds, people of different political parties. Doesn't matter, we all have at least something in common, and that is help to preserve our environment, our clean water, prime farmland, scenic vistas, and anything that goes along with that. I know you have a big program tonight. I'm just going to hit on 2 key points and then let Commissioner Hertzler give you an update on farmland preservation, etc. There's 2 things I want to bring up tonight. One is, I ask you all to reach out to your local elected officials. And when I say that, I mean specifically your township supervisors, your township commissioners. We at the county level, we can do a lot to help, but these are the folks that make the decisions on land use ordinances. These are the folks that make the decisions on possible rezoning of land. These are the people you have to get in touch with to help educate them on, you know, it is possible to have growth and preservation. It's being done already. Second thing I want to touch on is one of the groups that's here tonight, Preserve Silver Spring. Silver Spring Township has its own land preservation program. These programs are very, very popular in the eastern part of the state, but for some reason we only have one here in central PA. These programs are possible, folks. In Silver Spring, this was voted upon by the citizens. They passed it. They voted to approve a small tax increase so they could help preserve land in Silver Spring Township, which is the fastest growing township in the county. But we're also preserving land. I don't know the exact numbers, but for the short period of time that this group has been in operation, I think they have over 430 acres in the pipeline to be preserved. I think half of that's already been preserved. The rest of it is still awaiting settlement. And it's not all prime farmland. A good piece of it is. But there's woodlands involved, scenic vistas involved, and you got to start at the grassroots if you want some of this to be successful. So I wanted to bring those 2 points up. There could be other townships that have a similar program, but you have to reach out to your local elected officials and start from there and get a group going and continue, because we can have growth. Growth is a good thing, but we also need to preserve our treasures here in Cumberland County: prime farmland, clean water, and clean air. And I thank you for having us here, Rick. It is humbling to see all you people here, and God bless you all. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Hertzler.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Please give my colleague a round of applause. Vince, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to embarrass you, but he has been a breath of fresh air to the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners, and I'm so privileged to have the opportunity to serve with Commissioner DiFilippo. And, we have made some progress here in the past year or so with respect to farmland preservation. One of the things that we've done is we actually doubled from the 2016 program to the 2017 program the county's contribution from $250,000 to $500,000 in the 2017 program. There are about 8 farms that are pending settlement from the 2015 and 2016 program, and there's 8 farms that are going to be settled and preserved, an additional 860 acres of farmland, prime farmland in our county under the 2017 program. And once those 2 years programs are complete, we will be somewhere in the neighborhood of over 19,000 acres of farmland preserved since the inception of the program back in 1989. The farmland preservation program that we have, and it's actually a partnership with the state of Pennsylvania, was actually also established under Governor Casey's administration. But statewide, it's preserved over 500,000 acres now of farmland in perpetuity. So we're making progress here in Cumberland County, and as has been mentioned here this evening, as we got the dual-edged sword of being the fastest growing county in the state of Pennsylvania. So it's incumbent upon us to also redouble our efforts to preserve and protect our natural resources, our land, for future generations, and think about those generations that are yet to come and how important it is. Now, I mentioned that, and Rick mentioned that I was elected county commissioner in 2011. I'm now about 5.5 years serving as your county commissioner. I'm very privileged to do that. But before then, I actually served for 22 years as a township commissioner in East Shippensburg Township. Before that on the school board, so I'm actually my 33rd year of service in elective office here in Cumberland County. And when you think about East Shippensburg Township, which is on the immediate west shore, or I should say, the very eastern end of our beautiful county, you don't really think about too much in the way of farmland. But we have one farm left. It's the Brashear Farm, and it's about 40 acres, and that's still an operating farm in East Shippensburg, but we are pretty much built up. And one of the proudest things that I did, and along with my colleagues on the East Shippensburg Township Board of Commissioners, is we actually doubled the amount of park and recreation area that we have in our township during my tenure. And we now have about 180 acres. A large part of that is the Adams-Rickey Community Park, which gets tremendous usage from our community and from throughout the area. And that was a proactive action that was taken by the East Pennsboro Township Board of Commissioners. That didn't just happen. We didn't get a lot of grants. We got some grants, but mostly that was acquired by the township. And so I'm proud of that. One of the things we also did in East Pennsboro Township during my tenure, and I don't know whether I ever mentioned this to Rick before, but we created an environmental advisory council. We were one of the first municipalities in the county to create an environmental advisory council, and that council actually provides input on every development plan that goes before our planning commission in East Pennsboro Township. So we have always been sensitive to doing what we can to protect and preserve our natural resources. Also, we have a little gem right down at the end of the street where I live. It's called the Pine Hill Arboretum, and it was granted to the township by what was the Harrisburg Natural History Society a number of years ago. It's about 13 acres, untouched, natural preserve, all kinds of wildlife. And it's a beautiful little piece of our little community in East Pennsboro Township. But it is so great to see so many folks here this evening, and I think it's been said that this is all about balance. But one of the things we have going on also, and it was started when Rick was a commissioner, I believe, in 2006, and that's the Land Partnerships Program. Now, we went through right after the recession, right when I got elected as a county commissioner, we had some difficult fiscal issues. We had a structural budget deficit when I became a county commissioner, somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million. And so we had to make some tough decisions. And so for a while, in the beginning of my tenure, the first year in 2013, I believe we had to shrink the amount of money that went for farmland preservation, but we did have available funding from Act 13, which is the Marcellus Shale fee. Even though we don't have any gas wells here in Cumberland County, all of the counties in Pennsylvania, whether they have a gas well or not, or drilling, get a piece of that impact fee that was enacted by the General Assembly. And so we get funding that comes as a result of that, and it's based on population. And so what we did is we were able to utilize those additional funds that we're getting from the state to actually draw down additional state funds to help keep our farmland preservation program going. Now, like I said, this past year, we put $250,000 general fund dollars into that. This year, we put $500,000 general fund dollars into that. But what we also did this year was we said all of the funding that we're getting from Act 13 now is going to the Land Partnerships Program. And that, essentially is about conservation efforts. It's also about parks and recreation and trails. So we have an application deadline that's coming up, I think, June 1st. And I would just invite the collaborative and any of the other organizations that might have projects that they're interested in perhaps receiving some support through the Land Partnerships Program. About $270,000, over $250,000 is available in the 2017 program year for land partnerships. So we're all in this together. I think we all want the same things. We want to be able to have a thriving economy, but we also want to protect our quality of life and the natural environment that surrounds us for future generations. So I want to thank you all. The panelists are great. It's good to see Troy. And I was picked up on what he said, and what Vince said is correct though too. The county is required to have a comprehensive plan. But at the end of the day, it's your local municipal officials, as Commissioner DiFilippo mentioned, who actually have the decision with respect to land use. So you know, the county is looking at the big picture, and hopefully our local municipal officials are also doing the same thing. And so the intent is to establish the partnership that we all need to move forward together. So I want to thank Rick. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
We're going to proceed to the focus question part of the program, but thank you, Commissioner, for speaking. Just a quick note here. My two daughters often accuse me of looking at life through rose-colored lenses. Well, tonight, there's some partial truth to that. We're going to move to these focus questions, and so what we'll do is we'll present a question to one of the panelists, and then we'll allow the other panelists an opportunity to comment further upon that question. So the first question that we have is from Mr. Willingford. For a global company that decides to headquarter in the region, what factors drive this decision? And I'll just turn.
Thank you, George. When I think back to the 2007 acquisition, and that really being a trigger for the opportunity to look at consolidation and other facilities to South Central Pennsylvania, at the time I don't know that we knew that we would actually do that consolidation until presented with the opportunities that the community offered, right? So some of the factors, if I sort of list them one by one, the career technology centers were an important element of having confidence to know that this would be the place for us to consolidate operations. Workforce availability, especially with blue-collar employees and skilled trades, with welding and machining especially, which are important parts of the work that we do. There's an aspect around quality of life, and we've got, in the neighborhood of 25 different nationalities at the facility in Shippensburg, and there's a range of living choices between, say, Hagerstown and Harrisburg across the Cumberland Valley, with solutions for almost every person's need or desire. And almost, what I would say is almost true across that whole span as well, is that there's good quality education solutions as well. So people that want to relocate here, that's generally the first thing they talk to us about is how are the schools, and we can confidently answer that there are high quality schools in the region. Proximity to other mobile facilities in the 81 corridor. We've got a Mack truck facility in Macungie, PA. We've got an engine facility in Hagerstown, PA. Our trucks production facility is down in Dublin, Virginia. So from a supply perspective and supplier access perspective, there were good opportunities. Shippensburg University, I'll mention as well, has been a tremendous resource for us. At any given time, between 50 and 70 interns are active at our facility in Shippensburg, and again, that in the context of the pipeline of workforce is significant as well. So I would say those are the factors. I know too that we had a significant number of people that moved from Western North Carolina, Asheville specifically, where we had a factory, and who had a very, very strong desire to be able to connect into a community that had natural resources and access to natural spaces similar to what you might see in Western North Carolina, realizing that we're not in the mountains, but we've got access to the south and north to South Mountain, North Mountain. I think in general we found that people who have relocated here from other parts of the world and other parts of the country, in Western North Carolina specifically, have found what they feel to be a comfortable home. Our turnover rates are extremely low, and I would say that a lot of that has to do with the quality of life they found in this community, in their neighborhoods, and among their neighbors.
Other folks want to comment on that particular question, or we can move to the next question too, unless there's any particular comments? No? All right. Second question is for the next panelist. It's directed to Troy Truax. The question is, what best practices can be employed to allow for ongoing development while ensuring our area balances such development and simultaneously preserves rural character, environmental assets, and quality of life?
I think the question, the card we got was, we need to stand up so you can see us, so that's why I'm standing up. So, just to reiterate, there's two parts to the question. What best practices can be employed to allow for ongoing development while ensuring our area reaps the maximum benefits? And then the second part of that is asset-based economic development model. I wanted to show a couple slides. I think from a best practices, hopefully leaving you with sort of some food for thought. From a planner's perspective. But, I always looked in my career that I sat on the planning commission side and have had, individuals, residents of South Middleton Township or elsewhere in my planning profession where people were coming in and not having a clear expectation of why is this development proposal in front of us? How do we get to this point where this farmland is now becoming industrial? When did this happen? And I look back and I think about the fact that there's a couple things to ponder. I look at it from proactive planning and reactive planning. The proactive planning, I would state here that this is your opportunity as residents of Cumberland County and elsewhere, that making sure that, as the commissioners said, having current and relevant plans in place. You all need to actually have what I would call a strategy on paper through a comprehensive plan specifically of how you want your future growth and development in your environment that you live in, Penn Township, wherever, to look like 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, because it doesn't take that long for that time to pass us by. I mean, I came here in '91, and if I look back at a land use map of what it looked like in '91 versus what it looks like today, it's totally different. Given the growth and development. And I think Andy talked about how companies are looking at Cumberland County and elsewhere for a variety of good factors and reasons. Proactive planning also, in my opinion, establishes expectations for companies like Volvo or other industries to say, is this a good fit for me? We may have all the right assets, but a community may say, we've got such good natural resources, there's a place and time for you to put your development, and also there's got to be infrastructure to support that type of development. Spending the extra cost of money to extend sewer lines or other transportation infrastructure comes back to a taxpayer cost eventually, and that's the other thing that has to be looked at. And also engaged, elected, and appointed officials. Again, I think the commissioners echoed this, is actually leveraging the tools that are in the toolbox through the municipality's planning code and what have you to make sure that you're putting a plan together. You understand that your future land use is dependent upon natural resources, the preservation of those assets, but also how that translates to any types of land use regulations in terms of how it's interpreted into your zoning ordinance. What parcels of land should be zoned industrial, or thinking about it more importantly, maybe you need to look at a regional perspective because you have all of the natural resources that should be preserved, but your neighboring municipality has the access to infrastructure, sewer, water, transportation, that it might make sense to work collaboratively to identify what your regional growth strategy and preservation strategy should be. And then engage citizenry. You're the folks that are, paying the taxpayer bills. You're the ones going to the voting polls and actually putting officials in place to make those decisions. So that's what I would call proactive planning versus the reactive planning where you have an absence of most of that. You may have a plan, but it's now 10, 20, 15 years old, and it's not relevant to what's going on today. That's reactive planning to say, well, how did we get here? Well, our plan's not even up to date, so we can't even think about what our current issues are that we need to address. You're not establishing expectations for citizens to understand future land use proposals from private entities, etc. There's a lack of ability to effectuate any change positively going forward because you don't have relevant and current land use policies or plans in place to address those current situations. And there's an overall disengagement. I mean, this is anti-disengagement. Seeing this many people in the room tonight shows that you are interested in this subject. So that's a positive thing going forward. You are engaged in the conversation. And then with a reactive, there's no overall, it's all piecemeal. It's not actual cohesive in terms of your planning going forward. There's a topic, a part of the second piece is asset-based economic development. When I looked at that question, I thought, wait, we really got to have a definition. What do we mean by asset-based economic development? And this is coming from the International Cities Municipal Managers Association. But asset-based economic development focuses on a community's natural, environmental, social, cultural, and economic advantages, and how these can be leveraged into sustained economic growth and productivity. It focuses on building capacity in communities and strengthening connections within regions. And I'll use Boiling Springs as an example. Mike Eshelman and myself and a whole group of folks from South Middleton Township spent our time down in West Virginia at a training conference to focus on the issues that matter to us specifically in South Middleton Township and Boiling Springs. It's the fact that we've got a great lake that's very much an attraction for the region, but we've got assets there that are really kind of deteriorating property ownership, trying to almost sort of put a blemish on that asset, and also the Craighead House. You know, you've got local constituents actually looking at specific issues. So what we did, we looked and said, what are our assets for South Middleton Township? And one of the things that we came out of that was developing a specific strategy. We have a comprehensive plan, but we looked more specifically at how do we capture and tackle the issues that matter to us most. I mean, Boiling Springs is our gem, and now we're dealing with the Children's Lake. So we actually have a proactive group directly involved of fixing and addressing that issue, and also working with the Allenberry of leveraging that as an asset to our community, tying that in with the Appalachian Trail, tying that in with the Yellow Breeches. So we're looking at this holistically, but also the bike trails. Those are everything that we're looking at and our connections to the bigger picture. Our linkages to Carlisle, our linkages to that tourism corridor. So that's a real specific strategy that we've taken a proactive approach on and actually come together and now moving that forward now to actually address a real vital issue to us, and that's the issue with the Children's Lake. If we don't have that lake restored and the sinkhole problem fixed, we're not going to be anywhere. So that's where the citizenry has become engaged. We have a strategy behind that. And the same thing would apply to any land use issue that you might be dealing with in Penn Township or elsewhere in the western part of the Cumberland County. What are our assets? How do we preserve those assets? And how do we actually embrace economic development opportunities that we know are vital to our tax base? We've got to have that balance that Bill talked about. And one more sort of best practice I'll leave you with. The municipality's planning code is often looked at as sort of like the Bible of how you must put together a comprehensive plan, and that's a myth. Yes, it's our enabling legislation, but a statewide practitioner in Denny Pucco has been doing this for years. He himself, and I'll read what it says in that pink box. After 47 years of planning under Pennsylvania's MPC, there is a perception that a comprehensive plan follows a standard format, and the MPC provides the template. It's time to think differently, and doing will create a better and more implementable comprehensive plan. And what Denny's getting at, and what one of your municipalities that we're involved in is Lower Allen Township, they said this is what we want to do. We want to think about outside the box of how we create a non-traditional comprehensive plan that too often sits on the shelf, collects dust, and is usually better used as a doorstop because it's so thick. There's 5 strategies to what we call a key implementable comprehensive plan. You know, use that planning process to focus on real and relevant issues. And you as citizenry working with your planning commission, and typically it's an advisory group. It's a special group of stakeholders, citizens that actually form an advisory group to prepare a comprehensive plan. So focus on those issues that matter most. What's pertinent today in the next 5 to 10 years? Organize a plan around officials and ways citizens think. Don't make it so technical that no one understands it. Makes it very easy to read, digestible by everybody, so that not everybody's a planner like me. I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't read an engineering drawing to save my life. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we all have our professions, and let's make the plan usable and digestible. And devise workable recommendations with specific actions around those specific issues. Provide the capacity for implementation. It's financial, but it's also those citizens groups that actually come forward and become champions of those strategies. It could be locally based, it could be a watershed association, it could be the county or state agencies, or even private corporations could actually be part of that solution. And build community ownership and commitment. It has to take that group of citizenry beyond just the elected officials and the appointed officials to make that happen. It takes everybody working together to drive that plan forward. So hopefully those provide you with a couple best practice models, but also help you think about more of asset-based economic development. What are your treasures? What do you value most? And what are your challenges? And how do you address those as specific issues? And that might be your opportunity if you have an outdated comprehensive plan or thinking about updating your plan. Really use that as your model going forward to try to address what matters to us specifically here in Western Cumberland County.
Very good. Bill?
Thank you. I just want to add a little bit to what Troy said, because he was spot on in terms of the comments about proactive planning. I also have a background in planning. Before I joined the Heritage area, I was a county planner for York County. And one of the things that I would just add, and I think this is what exactly what Troy was suggesting, but in terms of being proactive, one of the very important things in establishing a community vision, I would say, particular to this area, is to look at economic development in terms of diversification. Right, so you would want to look at your employment sectors, your industry, and see what you can do about expanding those so that you're not having all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. The idea being, of course, is that you would want to try to get to higher wage, higher skilled jobs rather than only, for example, having a plethora. I don't know this to be a fact, but a plethora of forklift jobs, right? You want different types of jobs, white collar jobs to go along with those blue collar jobs. I think that's fairly obvious, but wanted to point that out. Also, I think it's really important, again, going to the proactive planning comments, really important to look at emerging, the sort of emerging economy, the economies that will kind of disrupt what we're doing today, right? So it's not just a question of when autonomous vehicles will be, if autonomous vehicles will be here, it's a question of time, right? So pretty soon, vehicles will operate themselves, and we won't need to drive them anymore. So what does that mean for the trucking industry, for example? And then along the similar lines, drones, having drones for delivery, the guaranteed delivery of items, overnight delivery. This is changing how we do business, and we need to stay on top of those kind of things, again, from a proactive perspective. And also the importance of a long-range perspective in planning, again, fits right in with what Troy was saying about being proactive. Where do we see ourselves 10, maybe even 20 years down the road? For example, when new warehouse spaces are proposed and approved, if they aren't there one day, how do we use that space, right? Do they become athletic fields or athletic centers? How can we do that in the long, how can we do both things? Do what we need today, and then project into the future what do we also need to be thinking about? And then finally, on the asset-based economic development question, I would also encourage from a planning perspective to look at what might be considered challenges or liabilities, right? So you're not just focused on assets. What are those things, what are those particular uses that are having adverse effects on our communities? And then the importance of that is to establish relationships. Use that as an opportunity to develop new partnerships with organizations and companies. The idea, of course, being looking for mitigation opportunities. And I'll just share a quick example. I think Dr. Pomeroy knows this one, but in our region, we worked out a relationship with the Solid Waste Management Authority. So I mentioned earlier in one of my slides, you might remember, I mentioned an incinerator. Well, that particular incinerator creates ash that is trucked down on 18-wheelers, downriver about 10, 15 miles to a big landfill. A landfill that, by the way, just got approved for a vertical expansion, and I think will be operating now for another 40 years. It's highly visible. It's in the very center of our region. It's right in the Susquehanna River Gorge. And one of the things that we did was we had a conversation with the Solid Waste Management Authority folks, and because of the forward-thinkingness of this group and their willingness to step up as leaders, what we're able to do is negotiate a situation where 10 cents on a ton is contributed to our organization to help with our work. So in other words, they recognize what we're doing is trying to protect the Susquehanna. They see that they have an impact on the river, and they want to be good neighbors. So my point then is we're looking at assets, yes, from an economic development standpoint. We're also looking at those things that create challenges and looking for partnership opportunities therein.
Perfect, thank you. That feels good to see it. I was drawn to this question and appreciate the definition for asset-based. And what I thought of immediately was probably different in so much as I thought mostly of agriculture, honestly. When you begin to judge or think about our assets in the valley, you have to first think about soils. We have some of the best Class 1 and Class 2 soils running down the center of our valley, not only in the county, not only in the state, but we rival the best soils in the world. Grown in a fairly temperate region, in an area close to market, that is extremely exciting in agriculture. So those Hagerstown and Duffield loamy soils that populate the limestone region of our valley are a true asset. And with that asset, we see some of the most productive farmers in the state, in the nation, and in the world. We have a diversity of farming taking place here in the county. We always have. Historically, the county provided the food and nourishment for soldiers to both gain our independence from England and further during the Civil War. This has always been an important area for agriculture. And beyond that, it's an important area for our environment. We are on the map for trout fishermen. Farming and water are connected. The farmland and ridgeland in our area is the place where water enters the ground and feeds the streams that create these high-class trout fishing opportunities in our community. We're at the halfway point at the Appalachian Trail. You just have to ride through Boiling Springs once or twice to notice that. And there's really, we can celebrate our history here. We can, and many of you, I've talked with actually a person here at the beginning who can trace their ancestors back to decision makers that walked up and down the Molly Pitcher Highway and contributed to what we have now. So our assets, I think, are important to remember in so much as the natural assets and the assets of how our community has grown, not just in the last 5 years or 20 years, but the last 200 and 300 years. And the Native Americans that first found this place so rich with game and soil and clean water.
Well, Bill, you can stay standing since you enjoyed that so much, because you had the third question. And I think this is a question that all the panelists can speak to broadly. And the question is, how do we sustain a vital and healthy agricultural community? What economic development resources, zoning tools, agricultural preservation, funding commitments, and other planning tools, beyond some of those that Troy mentioned already, can be utilized to continue this or facilitate this?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I saw that question, I thought, well, that could be a full day discussion. And I don't know the complete answer. And then let me make it also clear that it's very difficult to speak on behalf of farmers, because farmers are very diverse. They grow different crops, live in different regions, make their living in entirely different ways, come from different generations, and find themselves doing things very differently. A couple of things that I want to pick up on that were said earlier. Cumberland County is doing a great job with farmland preservation. In fact, Pennsylvania is #1 in the nation with the number of acres that is preserved. So we have an excellent system at work. And we have neighbors in eastern Pennsylvania, in Chester and Berks County, that are showing us the way by experiencing and putting together programs that we might want to emulate. In my job with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation not long ago, I was at a much larger regional workshop and heard from people working for the Department of Agriculture in New Jersey, and their major goal is farmland conservation and preservation. So there are certainly experts at arm's length that we might be able to engage to move that forward. Farmers work in a very challenging economic environment. The average age of a farmer is in their late 50s, probably 58. The environment in which many farms work in is ruled by supply and demand, where farmers are not able to set the price on their product. That product is, in price, is often set nationally or even globally. So what happens on the farm, as far as prices are concerned, are sometimes out of control of the very person who's made the investment to produce that commodity. And the prices are as sensitive as you can imagine, with global politics, trading, ups and downs in markets, the strength of the dollar, all those things impact a farmer. To keep a farm and a farm community in our valley is in part out of our hands with the economic realities that I just said, but there is so much more that we can do. And really the first part, I think, is probably getting to know our farmer neighbors and understanding. Many of us live in a world where our closest connection with food is at the grocery store. But understanding our neighbors and understanding their struggles is going to be very important to understanding how we might be able to encourage those groups to stay. And I know that the Cumberland County and the commissioners know that and form advisory boards, but it's important for the audience here tonight. The personal connections are very important. We need to look at not just funding mechanisms, but those are important, and we'll talk about economics in a moment. But is it pleasant to be a farmer in our valley? That's the question. And farmers really need a community. It's important for them in their survival to have other farms around them. Farmers depend on lots of service agencies. They depend on transportation and markets that are close by. And when farms begin to disappear, it makes it very difficult for the farms that are left to continue to operate. Their costs of services go up because the service, let's just take somebody that's going to change a tire, has to drive a much longer drive to service the farmer. Farmers' profit margins are razor thin. So when we see costs going up, it's very difficult. When we complain about the manure that gets on our car tire when we get home from work and it's smelling up the garage, well, you know what? That's part of living in an agricultural community. That's something that we have to learn to accept and embrace. And doing so makes farmers feel much more comfortable in their environment. I mentioned the average age, and that's important. Farmers in their late 50s, I'll just draw a picture, and again, this isn't everybody, generally is getting a knee replacement or hip replacement by then. They're the CEO, they're handling hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're also the one that's walking with the shovel and doing the early morning work. It's important for farmers to see a way forward. They have to visualize their success to be able to continue to reinvest, to be able to do the kinds of conservation activities that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation asks of them, to be able to stay economically viability, for them to develop a succession plan, which is a difficult task in itself because farmers are very capital intensive. They may not have $20 in their wallet, but they might have $1 million worth of equipment. And to pass that on to the next generation, depending on the cost of capital, becomes a whole different aspect. Our farming has always evolved in Cumberland County. It maybe in our life we might say that tradition is corn and cows, but that's not always been the case. Farms were very diversified earlier at the turn of the century, and today we're seeing more and more diversification. There's 2 vegetable produce markets in Shippensburg. We see many more opportunities for direct marketing and farmers taking their destiny in their own hands and creating markets. The Carlisle market, open air market that occurs weekly is an extreme asset for many farms. So we're seeing all kinds of farming. Cumberland County ranks in the top 10 in many of the production values that occur in agricultural economy. And actually, a fact that many may miss is that Pennsylvania is actually the 3rd leading state in producing organic produce. So things are evolving, things are changing. Farmers are close to markets as they exist here in Cumberland County, and that's another great reason for them to stay. But the second part of the question is, what economic activity can we do? And farmers don't always make decisions based on economics, but sometimes the sale of their farm is the only retirement that the farmer might have. But again, I'll say that farmers don't always make decisions based on that. They might want to see their heritage go on. They might want to see the farm preserved. They get a kick out of things perhaps being named for them. There's all kinds of incentives that we might be able to work together to develop. But one of the important things for economics is to look at the field of what's available. Our county is very active in pursuing farmland preservation. At least one of our townships is even raising more local funding. What we do at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to help farmers is often try and combine funding streams and do what we call stacking benefits. Stacking benefits might sound a bit unfair, but it is a way to bring more financial resources to a farmer to be able to essentially implement a conservation practice, or in the case that we're talking now, preserve a farm. So in stacking benefits, we might use the county and state funding to leverage federal resources to be able to essentially double that money and provide that, not for our own benefit, but provide it to the farmer to create greater incentives. So there are tools and ways to operate with these kinds of things, and I think it's probably important to know that. So, thank you.
Jonathan, did you want to follow on that, or no? All right, just a quick related note. Someone asked me that, of course, the Cumberland County Land Preservation Program does accept tax-deductible donations, and there's a lot of tax advantages to that. That's a note that came in the midst of our discussion here. We have a 4th question, and we'll direct that to Jonathan, so you have to speak anyway, all right? How do residents and community groups best become educated and involved in helping craft and execute the long-term vision for a healthy economy and a healthy environment? And I will say, on a related to that, and Commissioner DeFilippo mentioned this earlier, about talking to your municipal supervisors and township supervisors and other municipal officials. We have several current and former municipal officials here in the audience tonight. And of course, everybody in here, I think, is eligible to run for those types of offices. And I think we even have a League of Women Voters booth present here if you want to talk to those folks about how to go about that sort of thing. But with that said, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, good. Thank you for the question. I think it's a critically important one. And I think, too, Dr. Pomeroy, you pointed out the number of groups that are in this room and the number of municipal officials and agency folks and so forth. And so I think just to start by recognizing the important role that you all play. I mean, you all are catalysts in making civic engagement and citizen participation real in your communities. You know, so I've had experience you know, doing public meetings, organizing public meetings, scheduling them, trying to get plans approved and so forth. And I remember, you know, my colleagues and I just working hard to organize meetings and looking at each other at the end of the day, getting back to the office the next day, and why didn't we get more people, right? It's really difficult. We have a lot of competition these days, you know, whether you're talking about your kids' games, you know, soccer games, you're talking about, you know, work commitments and after, you know, evening meetings and so forth, church events and so forth. There's so many things to compete with, and so it's difficult. And I would hope that most of us can agree. One of the things that probably doesn't work best, you know, in other words, if our goal is to have citizens help create long-term visions, probably, but what doesn't work best is the minimum, right? So the minimum is those public hearings or public meetings that are required by law. Troy spoke eloquently about the municipality's planning code and the requirements thereof, and one of those is, you know, advertise and to hold public meetings before certain plan elements can be adopted. Right, so that's sort of at the baseline, you know, of what we have to do. And I think that, also want to say events like this evening, you know, we get a lot of people in a room together. This is a terrific starting point. I mean, this is where conversations, civic discourse, I mean, this is, I think, a forum where it can really happen best. And I would encourage more forums like this to happen. But I think in terms of when I made the claim that sometimes public hearings are held and that's the least we have to do, it's really going back to Sherry Arnstein in 1969, right? Anybody who studied planning knows her seminal work that was the ladder of citizen participation. Again, 1969, almost 50 years ago. And what she really did was she described this ladder in terms of showing participation ranging from very low to very high. So at its base level, it's really not participative. It's a situation where an expert working with, let's take government for example, creates a plan, and then the role of the citizens or the public in it is to just come out and not have any opposition to the plan, and we've approved this and we moved it along. And that's the real baseline, and at the top is citizen control. And so I think the reason I mention it is I think it's still a very relevant, important piece of work that I think, particularly as municipal officials and civic leaders, it's worth paying attention to. I think it's a good guide to determine where power lies in decision making. And also, I think that one of the reasons that it has survived all these years, again, almost 50 years, you know, the ladder of citizen participation, why it's still relevant, why I'm talking about it today, is our communities are continuing to be confronted with challenges and issues that make it difficult to move up the rungs, right? Because remember, at the very top is citizen control. How much control do we want to give to citizens for very important decisions that individuals may have been elected and they feel that they need to make it? So I think to sort of try to wrap up here, I think to make citizen participation work really well, again, I think it's incumbent on the government to provide opportunities, and I think we need to meet people where they're at. You know, that's a very narrow window of time. Maybe it's maybe an hour or two in the morning before they go to work, and at the end of the day, you know, maybe they're on the couch with the sweatpants on, not ready to go to a public meeting. So how can we use social media tools, for example, to reach people? Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. You know, there's numerous techniques to do community engagement, a lot of them. You know, many of you may have studied this in college and understand some of these things, but, you know, charrettes, nominal group technique, I mean, I could go on and on. There's laundry lists of ways to do it, and they're all good. They're all good, but it depends on what context, what you're trying to accomplish, and how those can be applied. So I guess the point is, we can be much more creative about how we do public participation, and that's oftentimes incumbent on municipal and elected officials to provide opportunities and forums for such. And then in summary, if we're looking at interest and how to increase civic involvement, I would suggest that perhaps one of the most important things to do is look at it from the standpoint of having a local focus. But not just a local focus that is connected to a regional vision, right? And Troy spoke to this, and I think this has been one of the themes that we've seen tonight. But that's what that's what will motivate folks, is when it has a local focus. And there always needs to be a starting point with something that the community cares about. right? And that's why the local consideration is very important. What does the community care about? And then when you move forward from there, you really need to be able to promote things that are practical and attainable. Right? You can't reach for the sky immediately. There needs to be things that are in the forefront that can be accomplished. And I would just end by saying, we need to include very diverse perspectives. We need to be prepared to look at this in terms of equitable development. Folks maybe who don't look like us, don't talk like we talk. And frankly, we need to be prepared to work with people that sometimes we might not like. So this is a tough thing. It's ongoing, and I think we can really, it pushes us maybe into places that are uncomfortable, that sometimes we feel like we're taking a risk, but it's very important to do if we want to, if our goal is long-term citizen engagement, we do need to take some risks.
I'd just like to say that Sherry Arnstein article, even though it's 50 years old, it's the most downloaded and widely read article for planning students. And it runs the 9-step ladder of placation at the lowest level, where residents merely show up and validate that a plan was presented to them, versus the highest step on the ladder, which is, again, citizen control and delegation. I've actually coerced some students to come here tonight. Instead of final exam, they have to suffer through me talking up front here. When it comes to demonstrating some of that, I sometimes jokingly say, all right, students, you get to help me write the final exam, all right? You get a big role in writing the final exam. What color paper do you want it on? Goldenrod or pink or white, all right? But that's an example of planning, the weakest form, the lowest level of planning participation, where the local residents simply validate the plan. Right? I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on participation or other aspects of getting involvement. All right, one more question. All right, well, we ran through all our four questions. We have some audience questions. All right, and a couple other items here. Some tough questions here, but tough questions sometimes are good questions. And we'll let whoever wants to tackle it first here. Within Cumberland County, within the Cumberland County area, and especially the I-81 corridor, we have lost so many farms and 17th and 18th century farmhouses, in particular Plainfield Interchange. What can be done to save our heritage? Europe has done a marvelous job with this balance of old and new. Here in Cumberland County, we do not have this balance. Yearly, we use more and more. This has to be something done. I'm afraid it's too late, but better now than later. Better something now than later. And so it's a commentary as much as it is a question. I don't know if anybody wants to address that in particular. It kind of crosses over some of the things you folks have mentioned before. Do you want to address that? All right.
I'll take a stab at it. I guess the question is looking at, you might have historic farms that have, resources like buildings or stone farmhouses that really should be preserved. I know down in another example, I work in the city of Charlestown, West Virginia, and they have many Washingtonian assets. You can go right in the city of Charlestown. You have assets that were actually built by Charles Washington, George Washington's brother. Just beyond the city limits, you have historic homes that were actually part of the Washington family that they built. And they're grappling with the same issues, growth and development along the 81 corridor, et cetera. But one thing that they've done is going back to that very focus of those are assets to our community that need to be preserved. So they've done through local land use regulations, historic preservation areas, et cetera. They've found ways to ensure that those types of assets make up their small town historical community, and that's what they put forward as a strategy, that any development that comes in, part of that strategy is making sure that there might be a buffer zone around those historic areas. They might actually be integrated into a development, but those types of assets are still retained as part of that cultural environment. The other thing they've done too is to say, if you want to be part of our community, you have to have or at least become, or at least abide by certain design standards. When it comes to commercial development, sometimes we'll get, the next gas station on the corner that really looks out of place because of colors or whatnot. You have the power to actually ask for Plan B design. you have the power to actually, you know, put forward some type of design guideline as part of your local land use zoning procedures that say, you know, we would like to have this type of look and feel to our community. But that's part of establishing that expectation that when people come into your community for development, you're actually saying, this is what we expect, and you have to make the decision, are you willing to say no? And if you have the zoning and the regulations in place, you at least have the ability to say no to that, because you have certain guidelines that they have to meet. It's tough conversations, but that goes back to the planning. Establish those expectations based upon what you deem your challenges to address and what you deem are your assets, and making sure that when a proposal comes in, you are establishing the expectation, this is what we as a community want from your investments in our community. So those are some of the ideas. It gets more granular, and I could talk to you more about it, of examples, etc., whomever might have had that question.
I'm going to be brief. It is a math problem in the end. I recognize that with the values that are sometimes paid to, for landowners for their proximity to Route 81. And we can't be in disgust about that. I mean, that is where our land and government is based on private property rights. So there's, at times, we're just going to have to accept that. But I think the key to answer the question is to be proactive and not, you know, we can't really rush in like an ambulance might when at the scene when there's an offer and land use planning is happening at the township level. We have to be there early. We have to be there when the farmer is midstream and looking for a good reason to continue their operation and keep their children involved, perhaps, so that you know, if there's a compensation and there's an interest in saving the farm, we work together. Many of the nonprofits that surround the room have expertise to put funding proposals together. It is an art and science in doing that, but working together to do those kinds of things might lead to success.
We have a third question here. I've shuffled the cards. That's not it. Question about EPA cuts. What impact are the proposed funding cuts to the EPA likely to have on air, water, and air, land, and water quality in Cumberland County? And actually, I'd like to say something about that since I have the microphone in hand. That you're held hostage. That there's good in that and bad in that, and I never would like to say that EPA cuts are good. I don't believe they're good, but what I would like to do is focus on what you can do locally. In other words, planning is grassroots. Planning occurs at municipal level, and so in some ways you're empowered from the ground up instead of from the top down. And we sometimes have to face that and build capacity locally. Funding isn't always the answer we're going to have to solutions. And I think, Bill, you mentioned something about funding streams earlier, but really it's building grassroots power and capacity to get a lot accomplished. The bad thing about cuts like EPA cuts is that a lot of the funds that we use, not necessarily directly EPA, but a lot of the funds that we use to purchase farmland or that land trust used to purchase properties is passed through state governments to local communities and local land trusts. And in a particular fund, Land and Water Conservation Fund, we have people in the room that know a lot more about the Land and Water Conservation Fund than I do. But the Land and Water Conservation Fund enables a lot of properties to be purchased and protected in perpetuity for local communities. Unfortunately, those programs get severely cut when these types of cuts happen. That's where we have to reach out to our elected representatives, U.S. senators or congressmen, and speak out and say, don't let these cuts happen because they're going to impact. I mean, this is my personal perspective, but it's going to impact our ability to protect local land resources. And so that's how the cuts are bad.
In addition to programs, let me just shout out to the Cumberland County Conservation District. We're blessed with a well-oiled machine in Cumberland County, and in my job I get a chance to visit many counties and really have the highest respect for our own. So in addition to losing funding for programs that farmers depend on, with cuts as severe as what are discussed, they'll also lose people, frankly, or lose funding, I should say, for people. It's up to the board's decision how they might backfill that funding. But there's a real chance that cutting those funding opportunities cut the ability of the Conservation District to do its job. The Conservation District is a friend to our local farmers, and they're a place that hold the keys to resources and education. We just can't let that happen.
And one, I think another example, we think about EPA cuts. If you think about what Carlisle's going through with the Maslin factory closing down, tire and wheel factory closing down, but for their brownfield grants that they got through EPA, they would not have been able to actually come up with a redevelopment strategy for those properties. And the cleanup of those properties are legacy costs that someone has to bear. So we not only think about our rural communities, we think about our urban communities here in Cumberland County, where they have been the lifeblood of industries that have been around for, in Maslin's case, over 100 years. You've got the Frog and Switch plant. You know, how long will a property like that, hopefully it stays in business forever, but there's that real reality that those old industrial properties become legacy issues that without that type of funding, there's a real challenge for those communities. Again, like Bill said, you know, I grew up in an agricultural community in Fulton County. My grandfather had an Agway dealership, but you know, we depended upon going to Everett or Bedford or even Breezewood for bread and milk, or other types of resources that we had to put back on our table. So without, you know, those types of communities that provide those local services, professional, what have you, those are the areas that the tax base is dependent upon that EPA funding, in a lot of cases, and other funding, to actually help do the reinvestments for urban redevelopment, et cetera. So we might not think about it in a rural area, but we have to think about the linkages that Bill talked about from the rural to our and urban communities and how those services interact.
All right, we have another question here. Do you believe we've reached a saturation point when it comes to this building and construction of distribution centers, warehouses? Tough question. That's a question. All right.
Yeah, I do. I don't have any scientific evidence to back it up, but I know that driving is dangerous on Route 81. I travel back and forth to Harrisburg with my job quite frequently, and just recognize that the infrastructure needs to be improved in order for me to feel safe in my normal driving habits to accommodate the amount of trucks that are presently visiting distribution centers. That's entirely my opinion.
I think I would add to Bill's comment by just saying, you know, one of the things that we talked about early on in planning for this event tonight, I remember at one meeting, you know, mentioning this concept of sustainability and how difficult it is to grapple with from the standpoint of defining it, and then even more challenging to try to implement sustainability. But in any case, one of the things I did was I jotted down just a real brief definition, and this is by an economist from the University of Oslo. His name is Ashim, and he said, development is sustainable if it involves a non-decreasing average quality of life. So again, development is sustainable if it involves a non-decreasing average quality of life. And so then that begs the question then, well, is my quality of life decreasing? And then that leads to the answer. So if we look at, is my commute time taking longer? You know, am I more stressed out when I show up at work because of, you know, so it's really becomes a personal question with community-wide ramifications.
Again, from a planner's perspective, it goes back to the planning. We may not want to see more warehouse development in our communities, but you have to remember the entities that are actually looking at properties, there's a private property rights. So it really comes back to that conversation that Jonathan talked about, making sure, like Bill talked about, those that have those large properties with ready access to water, sewer, transportation, those are going to be your prime targets for those types of developments. And it comes down to engaging, you as citizenry with those property owners, because at the end of the day, it's a property development right that they may have entitlements through the zoning that's implemented. So if it's zoned a certain way, then they have an entitlement to that development. So the next time a warehouse development comes in proposal, be sure to look to say, is it zoned that way? And most likely it will be. Or if it's not, they're going through a rezoning like we know a couple doors up 81. Those are big decisions. And anybody from West Pennsboro, Dickinson, you know exactly what you're going through. So it comes down to, and I know a little bit of a situation, we planned for that, we didn't want that, but the zoning got changed. That's where that engagement comes into play. That's where, believe me, I've sit in South Middleton Township long enough to know that, it's sad for me to sit back on a planning commission side and I hear a whole crowd coming in with the torches and pitchforks ready for armed to the teeth. And I have to ask myself, why are you here now? Where were you in the comprehensive planning stage? Why weren't you there? I can't help you. I'm a planning commissioner, and I have now looking at an ordinance that's telling me this is what's allowable on the books. This is what's zoned here. I can't change it right now. It's too late. So that's what I would beg you, that if you've got the opportunity where growth and development is on your back door in Western Cumberland County, now's the time to take the planning seriously and make those decisions and engage the property owners that are in the target zone for development, and making sure you're engaging them, because it's their maybe bankroll, it's their life savings that's tied up in a farm that now they've got to make an economic decision. Do I sell for the highest price, or do I look and say, this is part of the assets that makes Cumberland County so great? How can you help my life savings? That's a real message, and I hope you walk away from that knowing that personally you may not want that development, but you may not own that property. It's someone else's decision that you're making for them. But that's where the planning process begins.
So just a quick comment, and when we were in the planning meetings relative to coming to this session, there was a conversation about, sort of a short-term view and a long-term view, and I think that as a citizen of the community, I think preservation and conservation is such an important thing to put on the table and an asset to consider. The asset as well in terms of proximity to market and the channel of commerce that I-81 represents creates this potential for prosperity for the community if managed in a good way. So I think that companies that are locating distribution centers in the area, and I'm not in that business, but they have expertise in efficiency and improvement that can help define what the future, a better future perhaps, around that business. So the linking of business with community in the planning process, and maybe not, and again, there's a short-term, long-term aspect of this, but not a whole-scale rejection of development per se, because it is an economic driver that can then be levered back against this desire to sustain and preserve. So I talked about prosperity at the very beginning with my slides. I think prosperity is sort of a virtuous pursuit if it involves society and community, and if that allows us to lever and improve relative to sustainability, preservation, and conservation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now about 8:15. We actually said we'd wrap this up at 8. There have been some great questions. I would like to have another round of applause for the panelists. The Cumberland Conservation Collaborative is a platform. That's what we are. We're educators, we're facilitators. Chinese say journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Well, tonight we'll maybe look at this as one step. It's only one step. There's still 999 plus miles to go. But something that's been encouraging for me as a member of the Cumberland Conservation Collaborative is to see we have industrialists, we have someone from an engineering company here, there were representatives from the Harrisburg Realtors Association here, we have county elected officials, municipal elected officials, farmers, environmentalists, citizens. So let's keep this going. Let's stay engaged. I liked that first section from 5:30 to 6:30, seeing all the individual conversations that were happening. Let's share ideas. Let's share with each other what's working. Let's work together and keep it going. If you do have further questions, these gentlemen are graciously here for a little while longer. You're welcome to ask them. We have a website, the Cumberland Conservation Collaborative. If you're not a member of the collaborative and you would like to participate, we'd love to have you. The only qualification is interest. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Let's keep it going. God bless you all, and have a safe trip home.
Just a quick note, all presentation slides will be posted, I think, on the collaborative website, and I don't know if we'll be able to get a video on there, but if we'll relive the video, I'm sure we'll find a way to get that available.
Tell me when it's clear.
Thank you very much. Have a good
Clear.
evening.